pitch day. It's our last meeting before pitch day for sure, and also we're not going to have another one of these like kind of just like lecture-y meetings this semester, and we're going to hit the ground running right after this on actually building your businesses, which is really exciting. So we're really close. But tonight we're going to cover, generally speaking, how to give a pitch. Did anyone listen to any good speeches? Did anyone watch the TED Talk I sent out? Oh, you watched TED Talk?
I watched a good speech.
Oh, what was a good speech?
It was Obama's speech at the convention.
Oh, yeah.
2004?
2004. Fun fact about that speech. So, do you know who John Favreau is, like on Pod Save America? So John Favreau became Obama's lead speechwriter, but on that team, he was the youngest speechwriter for John Kerry. And John Kerry wanted to use the line, "There are no red states and no blue states, there are only the United States." But he heard that Obama was going to use it in his speech, so he told John Favreau to go over and tell Obama not to use that line. And then John Favreau goes up to Obama and is like, "Hey, like, it'd be great if you like wouldn't use that line." And Obama's like, "I'm gonna use that line." And then like he turned around, went back, and then ended up working for him, which is kind of cool. I don't know. Very funny story. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, so I went on Sheryl Sandberg about why we have few women leaders. She talked about how women most of the time don't speak up or take the initiative to ask for a higher wage. Or,
Who's Sheryl Sandberg?
Sheryl Sandberg?
CEO on Facebook.
Yeah.
She also wrote a book. Yeah, wrote a book. Yeah. And she wrote a new one too. Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
I haven't read them, but it sounds like I've heard her speak. It's really cool. She wrote a good one, a good piece too about like not being your own personal brand, like being like complex and human, which is kind of cool. I don't know, find that and share it. Cool. And then we're gonna go over the pitch day logistics today, and just kind of like go over the concrete so you know what to expect walking in. We're gonna cover why, how, what. If you know Simon Sinek, we're gonna look over his famous like TED Talk, like a little bit of it. Then we're gonna cover the content that you're gonna need in your pitch, give you like an explicit template that you can use for your pitch going forward. And it's really helpful for pitches at every single stage of your business, not just at this early stage. It's useful for all of them. And then style, Teeger has a radio voice for those who don't know, so he's gonna help you with your speaking style. And outlining your pitches at the end, and then we'll go over questions, and then it'll be Thanksgiving break, which is exciting. Okay, cool. Just to wrap up sort of where we are, we've covered kind of a lot in the first half of this. If you want to review anything, all of the presentations, I realize I need to email out the link to the presentations again, but we do have all the presentations, and we've written them out so that they should be pretty good notes if you need to like review any little tidbit that you found along the way. And you can always let us know if you have any questions about anything along the way. But now we're on how to give a pitch, and then after that we're gonna build a team, create your MVP, and then create to-do lists for winter break.
Also, apologies for the late editing, but the videos will be up within like a couple days into Thanksgiving break. If you go to yalelaunch.com and then go to the schedules tab in the top right corner, you'll be able to see all the videos from the past weeks in their lessons.
Okay. So now on pitch day, which is gonna be not next Monday because we're gonna be on break, but the Monday after that. Same time, same place here. We're business casual. Like this is kind of startups. You don't really have to wear anything. Like you can wear sort of whatever you want for in entrepreneurship. But we're gonna be taking photos, so just be like ready for that. However you want to present yourself. It'd be great if you could email your presentations at least 15 minutes before we go live, so that I can have them all up on one tab. But I know that everyone's going to be working until the deadline, so you're welcome to just email it whenever it's done. It's actually going to be a 4-minute pitch, and we're going to have to keep strict on timing for this. You'll get a warning at like 30 seconds, and then you'll get a hard cutoff at 4 minutes. It's really important to know the timing of your pitches. A really not good thing to do is to be cut off kind of mid-idea and be like, oh, I'm just going to skip this slide and get to the end. That kind of shows that you lack of preparation. So it's really good to script it out, make sure that you get down to 4 minutes because we will hard cut off. And then we'll do 2 minutes with questions and answers. I'm going to try to get a couple of judges from Sci-City. Some of the mentors here can come in so that you have fresh faces asking you questions, and they'll give written out feedback. Try to stick around a little bit afterwards just so we can take photos and I'll get some food. And then also, we're going to make sure that everyone's really engaged in this. It's really important that you pay attention to everyone else's presentations to give feedback on them. That's going to be actually required for everyone to submit feedback on other people's projects, not like a rating, but just like what they did well, how you think they could improve, and any ideas that you might have for the business going forward. There's no winners and losers from this pitch day. Other pitch days there are, and that's really fun, competitive sort of scene. So you can treat it like that. Like bring your A game, really try to impress. But there's going to be no winners from that. And then also, this is a great opportunity for if you don't have an idea, or if you have an idea and you're trying to find co-founders for that idea. This is a good time to know what everyone else is working on. Pay attention to people who are good presenters, people who really have good skills that you're interested in working with. And remember, mark down the ideas that you think about working on, because after that, we're gonna give everyone an opportunity to join teams. I know a couple of you have expressed concerns over, I don't know if this is the business idea that I want to pursue, that I'm working on right now. Totally fine. Still give a great pitch. It's a really important experience. But be totally comfortable with the fact that you can approach someone afterwards and say, I want to work on their idea instead of mine. Yeah. Any questions about pitch day? Yeah.
If you're already working with someone, can you pitch together?
Yes. Great question. Sorry. Ideally, no groups bigger than 3. I don't think that there are any groups that are 3, but let's try to keep the groups really small, particularly at the beginning. It's a really good experience just to make sure everyone has an opportunity to speak and engage. That's really the reason for it. Any other questions? Cool. Awesome. All right. Now, the full TED Talk here is really good, but it's 20 minutes. I'll send out a link to it afterwards if you want to watch the whole thing, because it definitely gets you more like pumped up. But this is kind of the key part of it.
So, when you're constructing a pitch deck, I would highly recommend keeping in your mind what Simon Sinek just said. I've always done that before, and it's gotten me a lot better results than before when I went. I had this idea for a betting company. Said, oh, we're a betting company. We make ones that are much more convenient. Versus going, we want to make your mornings more efficient and make you a more efficient person. Something with that is a lot more powerful, and that's going to be a lot of help when you construct your pitches for pitch day. Now, this is the general outline of what all pitches should have, and generally the order we're going to cover them today. So we're going to start with the problem. Of course, that's a big part of why you're doing what you're doing, what you would be solving. But a lot of people overthink a lot of things that seem simple, but definitely a lot more complex than they give them credit for. Then you talk about your solution right after that, how you're solving that problem, and go into more logistics such as market opportunity and what competition, which we just had you research last week in track for your business models. And then these are going to be coming in later, not necessarily for your pitches for this pitch night, but when you're pitching to investors, for example, or going to pitch competitions where they might be giving you prizes or might giving you opportunities at incubators, you're going to be wanting to emphasize these a lot more. Traction being what you've done so far with the time and resources you've had, really showing them that you have what it takes to implement the solution you've thought of. What team you have right now, how structured and organized you are within this team, what are your roles, if you have them, and how do you work together. Then next step's going to be a big part, because that's going to be how are you going to use the money that they may potentially give to you. That's especially important for investors, but still very important for pitch competitions. And the last step is appendix, which we will cover later on.
I want to walk you through kind of like our pitch deck right now, just as an example. So this is what I work on. So to start with kind of the problem, you've all defined the problem that we started with that way back when, and it's really important that you kind of go back to it. Although communicating this problem is sometimes more difficult than you'd imagine. People respond really well to stories and narrative structures for problems. Oftentimes they say, okay, last week I walked out of a car and then I, tripped or whatever, and that's why I created a shoelace company. Like whatever it might be, that story is actually way more memorable than saying 65% of people forget to tie their shoes, so I created a better shoelace company. remembering that specific story is way more important. And put someone in the audience of the shoes that you're solving. So Verb starts every single pitch with one night in New Haven when Matt was a sophomore in college. He was studying for an exam, and he walked out of a coffee shop having spent too much money and too much time in waiting in line, and felt jittery and like he hadn't gotten the nutritional benefits that he wanted. So he set out to create something better, something that would make him feel incredible, be healthy for him, incredibly convenient, and give him the energy boost that he needed. Like that's the way we start every single pitch, even when we're still doing it to investors today and they already conceptually understand the problem. It's important that they emotionally get that problem as well. Personal stories are compelling for another reason, in that it conveys that you have personal expertise, which is sometimes really important to have, that you uniquely understand the customer standpoint because you are a potential customer. That's always helpful. We've covered this a number of times, but I can't stress it enough. Who faces this problem? This is incredibly important to communicate during your pitch, and who does it matter to most, not just the broad range of people that it could apply to. Have no jargon when you define what specifically is the problem. A lot of times it'll make sense in your head, but if you have too much jargon in there, it won't be as easy to understand for your audience. And then get to the root of it. Remember we talked about asking why 3 times and making sure that it's urgent and important, not just kind of like a small problem that maybe we can deal with in the future. And this will come up over and over and over again in this deck, but numbers are really, really great. Investors love them. You can prove anything with numbers, and it really adds some credibility to your argument.
Do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah. So, and then we go into your solution, which you've already covered. You've already defined your value proposition, and this is where you communicate it in a very clear and explicit way. And then what do you do to deliver that? So this is where you talk about the delivery mechanism that you've also already written, but doing so in a concise way. And then, again, what we did right after how you deliver your value proposition, what's your business model? And then at this point, again, numbers are really, really fantastic. And diagrams also work really well. If you have something that's complicated to track who benefits who, you really should draw that. And then as you can see in ours for Verb, this is our value proposition broken up into all of our sort of the individual components that made up our overall value proposition. And you can make a slide that's exactly the same way, conveying all the points behind it.
When talking about your market opportunity, this is going to be essentially going for the third one. To investors, you'll be hinting at the question, how much money could you make with your project? But for the more important question you're asking with this market analysis is how big of an impact you can have with your venture. Now, if you're ever looking into consulting while you're in Yale, this is going to be, hint, a big question for those consulting case interviews about market sizing. In terms of market sizing, you want to look at certain factors such as, okay, if you have a market size and you're going within America, how many people are in America, how many people are in a particular city that you want to target, and then you want to think about each individual person and how often would they use your product. For example, Verb bars, you could think about, okay, how many times a day would a person eat a Verb bar, or how many times would they consume it in a week? And then from these kind of different aspects, how often you would do it, how much access they have, considering all these factors, you'll make some sort of rough estimation as to the dollar size of your market, which will give you that sort of impact creator you're going for. Breaking up into market segments, I'm not sure if you want to take this one?
Sure. So one helpful part of this is a lot of times your market won't explicitly exist. Like I know some of you are solving for, just because you emailed me most recently, like you don't know what the market for reusable sporting goods is. Like you don't know what people pay online for reusable sporting goods because that market doesn't really exist. But you do know how much Americans spend on sporting goods every single year. That number you can find, and you can also find how much, like what the market cap is of Dick's Sporting Goods, for instance. And those are good hints at your market size. So for segmenting this, you can create overlapping markets that will hint at the size of your overall market. For Verb, for instance, there is no market for caffeinated energy bars effectively. Like there's no defined research market size, but we know that retail coffee, huge. Energy drinks and shots, very big. Better for you food movement, also pretty big but growing. And we can show that we fit at the intersection of all of these markets, and sort of if you add up all the little parts that we could capture here, there's a pretty big market value, and that's all that we have to communicate.
And that's what you mentioned right now about the growing aspect is a really important part of your pitch. If you can show them the different nuances between the markets, how you're hitting them, but also the trends of where they're going, and that you're addressing those needs that are yet unmet and yet undeveloped perhaps, will meet them and you know where this industry is going, that's going to show that you really understand your market and that your problem is going to be a really effective one. And as mentioned before, numbers are great for this. Pitchers always love quantitative data, diagrams, anything you can show to really clearly demonstrate that you have a good market for your product.
Cool. Competition we covered last week. This is a great opportunity to kind of show and demonstrate what your sort of competitive landscape looks like. Doing so really effectively. You don't want to spend a lot of time talking about what your competitors do well. People will get that from your slide. What you want to talk about is how you're better, and that's what you really want to focus on, conveying in your pitch. We also talked last time about direct versus indirect competitors, finding a lot of people who kind of accomplish the same value proposition, although through a different delivery, for instance, or targeting a different customer. Those are all important things to include here. And you kind of want to get to this answer, like, what do you understand that no one else does? So when we give this slide, for instance, we talk about how all these options already exist, but there's nothing in there that tastes great, is very healthy, you can get it very conveniently, and that you can fit 12 of them in your backpack. There's nothing that overlaps with all of those options right there. Some of them have one or two of those characteristics, but not all of them combined. Oh, sorry.
All right, this is the part about traction I mentioned before. Now, this won't necessarily apply to the ventures that launch for pitch night after Thanksgiving, unless you really kick ass over Thanksgiving break. But yeah, this is the part where you're going to be showing what you're made of to these people you're pitching to. So, what progress have you made so far? You're saying that even though you don't have, the money, you don't have the mentorship or the resources that you're trying to pitch for, you're still able to make progress. And that's a big part about being an entrepreneur, is really being scrappy with the resources you do have. And that can mean the sense of trying to get an MVP out in any way you can. So you may not have like the best coding experience, but if you can make a rudimentary website and start serving people with that, that's going to show that you really have what it takes to really use the resources that you will be getting in the best possible way. How do people know what you're making?
How do you know people want it?
Yeah, how do you know what you want? If you have made any sales at this point, you're going to want to include those numbers right now just to show that people do want your product and that there's a growing demand for that. Show momentum. FOMO is a big thing, just because I'm not sure if you guys have taken any behavioral economics. People value losses a lot more than they value gains. So if you show them that they're losing something by not using your product or service, they'll want to use it a lot more than if you just framed it in the sense of, here's what you could gain.
So big thing kind of on this one is there's always a way to spin whatever you've done. If you're at an early stage and you have not really done anything, but you've talked to 6 friends around your dining hall table, you can say, we've only had this idea for a week, but we pitched it to 6 people and 90% of them really like it. Like, that is enough of a statistic to use in this pitch. On our early days, we said that we passed out 300 free vert bars to people and 77% of them rated it 4 to 5 stars on taste. That was our first stat, and we were able to get $5,000 at a pitch competition from relying heavily on that stat. And you can do those types of things from whatever point you really are. The idea of momentum, you can always create something by showing you've done this much and you're just starting. You're just about to hit your growth. You're about to get started. Get on board this train. And then FOMO, again, to your talk about, it's like, if I didn't join your team or if I didn't invest in you, I'm missing out on this fantastic opportunity. You need to walk in there with the confidence that you can do that.
And in terms of customer reviews, I know when I first joined Launch, it was also an assignment to go out and get at least 50 reviews within 2 weeks. And this is something you can easily do. And this is going back to that point about not being afraid to discuss your idea with as many people as you can. Because if you discuss it with them, you're going to get a lot of valuable feedback about what you can do better and how you can improve to reach even more people in a more meaningful way.
Again, this slide, we won't spend much time on it, but eventually you're going to have a team slide. If you do have 2 people, try to convey what roughly one person does and what roughly one person is planning on doing. And yeah, that's what you accumulate.
Next steps, we talked about traction a little bit with what you've done so far, but this is where you're going to show what your plan is for the future. And this partly goes into what we've done so far with competition business models. This is all getting you thinking about what's there and what you need to do as the next steps. For this, it's really good to have milestones in a plan. So if you can show them, we have very clear goals with clear deadlines that you are determined to meet, and if you can show in your traction page that you have met these deadlines before, you're going to build your credibility with the people you're pitching to immensely.
Awesome. And then, of course, we showed you the why, how, what, because you really do need to communicate your why. And at the end is a great opportunity to sort of show this. This is like blow the doors off, like what is your grand vision, what are you going to do, how are you going to change the world type of idea. And convey it just in a sentence. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be within the near-term future, but it can be just a great way to wrap up and inspire folks. Because people do psychologically associate the end of your pitch with that. Don't just be like, oh, and that's the last slide, thank you. You really should end on a bang, know when you're gonna cut off. It's totally fine to end earlier than your time period, or if it's carrying on, make sure you get that last sentence in, but then that's it, but end on a clean note. That's actually really important. One time we won one pitch competition, and we knew that everybody else that had gone did not finish on time. They all were cut off midway through, and I think that the only reason we won was because we finished on time and we gave a professional looking pitch, and that really does matter for that. So with that, oh no, I skipped something. Okay, and then appendix. Here's a little cheat that other people don't use, and I don't know why they don't use it as much, but sometimes during pitch competitions people won't have appendices, and it's really helpful to have that because it shows that you thought about everything that they could have asked. If someone asks a question, they're like, I got them on this one, I stumped them, and you go, oh, thank you so much for asking that, I'll turn to slide 3. That projects so much confidence, and you can create a great bank of frequently asked questions to be prepared to actually give them. Here are some that you're going to get asked all the time that you're not going to include on your other slides. People are going to ask, what are your margins? And you can say our margins are 43% now and 52% at scale. Or you can flip to a slide that shows how your margins are going to increase over time. And I guarantee you they're going to like the idea of you knowing your margins so well that you have a slide on it already set up for it. Eventually you're going to learn projections. I hate seeing projections in startup pitches. And if any of you, I'll just put a warning out there. No one here provide this upward hockey stick growth that says in 3 years we're going to be making $7.2 million and in 5 years we're going to be making $30.1 million. You have no idea. You don't, no startup has any idea. Verb is hoping we know what we make next month. That's where we're at. And so I think that, you really shouldn't do that in a pitch. It shows a lack of professionalism, and most smart investors will not look at that, and no one has ever invested in that. I was at a pitch one time, and this guy was pitching this device that would help monitor parents when their teens were driving. Cool advice, Tesla's already building it, it's fine. And the guy was he flipped to his next slide, and clearly he just punched in Excel 30% month over month growth for 7 years. And then if you do that, you're gonna be making $8 billion in 7 years. And I was like, no, that's not possible. And so a judge asked that question, and he turned red, and it was just ugly. So you really don't wanna make that type of mistake. Eventually you're going to want sort of a press page or our social media or something like that, anything to kind of brag on you. You can also flip to strategic appendix slides while they're asking other questions, just so they kind of look at it and they're like, okay, wow, they have customers, they have smiling faces, people like their product. Those types of things are all good. You're going to want your funding details once you have them, and then use of funds. No one's going to invest in you if you finish with a slide that's now give us $1 million. What are we gonna do with it? I don't know, but we need $1 million. You really need to break that down when you're gonna give a pitch for, for instance, Sci-City. If you apply for the fellowship, that's $15 grand, and you should have an itemized budget for how you're gonna use that amount of money when you walk into Sci-City to pitch, which I hope all of you do. And then anything that you think you might forget, or anything you think your co-founder is gonna forget, put it on a slide. Okay. Now we're going to talk about how to speak in front of people and get into sound. Wait, any questions on content really quick before we move on? Yes?
So how much of this stuff should we include in our appendix? Because we probably, releasing aren't going to be crowdfunding.
Okay, so a lot of those say not for this one. I just realized that. I think your appendix should be, you give your practice pitch to a family member over break, or to a friend over break, or to your co-founder when you come back, and ask them to try and ask questions. And every question that they ask, write it down, and then make a slide to answer those questions. Would be the way that I would kind of start out. Like we did when we were starting out, we recorded every single question that we were ever asked in any pitch, because you start realizing that all of them get bucketed into like a small number of things, and if you know your answer and it's perfectly well scripted to those questions, you're gonna do a lot better. Another point on questions. Questions are not the opportunity for you to just answer what they ask. They're an extended opportunity for you to get across talking points. You need to think about it that way. You have 3 things that you want to communicate, to your audience. It's like we have a great idea, a great team behind it, we have an exceptional market opportunity, and we're already working hard on it. Like those are the 3 things that you want to communicate, and every question that someone asks, try and rephrase it to get back to it. Like someone say like, what's your biggest risk? Like don't be like, oh man, I don't really know. Like we have a lot of risks. Just be like, our biggest risk is this, but here's how we're addressing it, and this is gonna allow us to be super successful next year. Those are ways that you can start spinning your questions back at them to show positive bullseye. Sorry, that was kind of rambly, but yes, Victoria.
My favorite small thing to do during pitches, which like some other people might not do, and then when you stand out, is to kind of like, if it's a competition where they award you money, just assume you win the money.
Yeah.
Just be like, and with this $300, we are going to do this. And the judges hear that and they're like, oh yeah, they could use $300. Like, and people want to be a part of like growing something and like know that you're going to be using whatever you win successfully, and that actually just like planting that idea in their mind of like giving me $300 actually like makes them more likely to just be like, yeah, here's $300. So like just assume you win the money even if you don't win the money.
That's a good point. Parsa?
Yeah, so, and also like just from, I was at a pitch event in May, so like on that note, keep in mind where you're pitching and how much you're pitching for, because there was a group that came and we were pitching for $5 grand. They were pitching this basically Uber for healthcare systems, and they needed like, basically they had already set up like their wireframes, they had an MVP and all this stuff, and they needed like really they needed 50 grand. And then one of the judges turned around and said, what are you doing for what are you gonna do with $5 grand? You guys seem like you need way more. Like the other groups seem to need $5 grand, and kind of like they didn't have an answer for that. So basically, like if you're pitching for $300, don't be pitching something that needs 100 grand, or the other way. Like if you've already set up everything, you just have to keep in mind what you're pitching. You notice that people when they go to these things, sometimes they pitch in a weird way that doesn't fit to what the judges are looking for. So kind of know your audience.
That's awesome.
basically.
That's awesome. And the reason that we walked through this explicit of a here's what slide 1 looks like, here's what slide 2 looks like, here's what slide 3 looks like, is because that's the way it is everywhere. Every pitch deck that you look at that's well made, that's fundraising for any type of fundraise, whether it's a $25 million Series C or their first pitch, they're all formatted basically that exact same way. Like I'm not making this up. Like that's really key that you kind of get that down and you get really good at that format. Any other questions on content before we switch over to style? Cool, great.
In terms of speaking style, now if you are pressed for time, like we want to give you guys as much time to work in your ventures as possible, we may be speaking like this, a little bit faster, a little bit more energy, but if you really want people to pay attention, you can slow your speaking style down. Really give those pauses, not maybe as much as Obama, but giving those pauses in there. Really force people to take a break from what you're saying, allow them to absorb it, and allow you to keep their concentration a lot more. But it's all about finding your style. Like there are, of course, extremes. Like some people like to really go fast with lots of facts and all that kind of stuff. Some people like to use an announcer voice and capture viewership that way. But that's kind of extreme. I've never pitched with that voice. One thing in every style that you will develop, and you will develop your style over multiple iterations of giving your pitch, is you want to have energy. Nobody's gonna buy your product if you don't seem like you're excited about your own product. So, a big thing is make sure you get enough sleep the night before, because that's a big thing no matter how much caffeine you get. If you're talking like this, but your eyes are like this, it's not gonna come off as effectively. Eye contact. If you're talking in a room like this, make sure that you're scanning different parts of the room. If you get a little bit of anxiety from that, look at people's right between their eyebrows is a thing, or like look towards the back row. But you just wanna make sure that you're giving the audience a sense that every single person in the audience is being heard.
Quick point on that. For the eye contact point, it's really key that you know where you're gonna look before you walk up on stage, particularly if it's a bigger stage. And do not do like this, where you look at one person the entire time and you only talk to them, because the other judges will know and everyone in the audience will know. It's difficult to do scanning with a room that's bigger than this. This is probably about as big as you could do with scanning, but oftentimes what you do is just look right at the first level, like you're speaking in a big auditorium, first level balcony, that's where you stare at the entire time. Everyone will think that you're looking at them. Everyone will think that you look inspired because you're looking up. And I'm serious, this is actually what they tell like speech makers to do. And it's much better than trying to make individual eye contact with a bunch of people in a big audience, because you're gonna lose track of what's going on and you're gonna get kind of bustled. So
Really
figure
quick,
that out. Yeah.
on that
yeah.
note, there's basically two things, like I'm speaking to here, but essentially there's two things you want to do. You want to have a home for your like hands, and then a home for your like the visual component. So what Ben is saying is spot on, is you want to have like somewhere to look to, and then same thing with your hands, like you kind of want to either have them down or like here, but find somewhere kind of consistent to put them. And then the other thing with eye contact is you can almost think of it as like passing the ball to someone. So like I can just like look at you, and then like it's the same amount of time as like when I look back, right? And then it kind of like that's how you can think of it. Like if you're making eye contact with people in a small room, that's how you can kind of think of it. As you're passing the ball and then getting it back, and passing the ball and getting it back is like that's kind of the timing you want to go with.
Yeah, and because Bennett brought up that point, it's really important to watch out for that kind of thing, especially when you have a judges panel, because there usually are other people in the audience besides the judges, and if you can show the judges that you're not just pitching this idea to them, but that you're used to pitching this to the community, they're going to be a lot more impressed than if you just look at, the 4 people on the panel and make everyone else feel like they're ignored.
Great.
And
Is it good to ask like rhetorical questions, as in, or like lead with a question to like ask and get attention?
I would never really lead with a question. Oh, a temptation, that's a good question, because this is a good do not do this. That a lot of people will start out with like, who here has faced this problem? And like the audience, like half of them are asleep, half of them like don't, you don't want like 4 hands in the back being like, everyone faces this problem. Like you really, really, really do not want to ask questions that need any type of engagement from the audience.
Well, what if it's like, I meant like, not like from like the audience, but like just like a fact that like you know to be true. You're phrasing it in a question, I suppose, or should you just state the fact then, I guess?
You should just state the facts.
Okay.
Questions don't normally exude confidence.
Okay.
And the biggest thing that you need to have in this room is confidence
Okay.
when you're going in there.
And especially if you're thinking about asking a question that could potentially not get as many responses as you want, I'd really avoid those. So, and because Christina mentioned it about the hands, we have the box method here. And Beth does a great job of this. I'm trying to do this right now, though I tend to be a little more exuberant. But when you are speaking in a professional environment, you have a box right here where you want to keep your hands. Now, small gestures are very good for emphasizing different points. If you want to do really grand gestures, you might hit someone. But people tend to look at you as a bit too wily and out of it. So, and if you have no gestures whatsoever, they're not going to really be paying attention as much.
Yeah.
It's a small visual aid, but you want to keep it professional and a bit contained within this little box right here.
That's actually why the photo of Bill Clinton is up here. Bill Clinton, when he was running for president, the first time he gave one town hall, and he got really low ratings for trustworthiness. I wonder why. But anyway, he, I didn't think that through, but I said it. Anyway, but then they did research on it, and it was because his hands were out here. He was like, it's the economy, like we gotta talk about the economy, and people like that doesn't exude trust. And then so his speech advisor told him to keep it within the box right there. And then every single time you see Bill Clinton, he's right here. Every single time that you'll see that. You'll find him occasionally like this, but generally when he's talking, it'll be within the box. So that's where I got that idea from.
Yep.
And then really quick with like gestures and stuff, I think it a lot has to do with like your kind of style, and what Teeger was talking about is it kind of comes down to what you're comfortable with. Same with like your stance is like you want to kind of keep it like you don't want to like have your legs crossed, and like you kind of want to keep your body open so that you kind of are like almost transferring energy between you and the people that you're talking to. So make sure there's not like a lot of like the wavering back and forth. Like just like stay grounded in that, and even if you need to practice that, just go for it. Just like stay grounded while you're talking, because it's like that. It's kind of like the wavering back and forth. There's a lot of like stats and stuff that show that people kind of remember more of the visual component and the like voice over what you're actually saying.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
On the stance point, 2 things. 1, don't lock your knees. Like there's like the rumor that you'll faint than some people would. So keep like one knee bent, and you can like switch which knee is bent. Like this actually will help with nerves. Also, if you have a hard time shaking or staying still, curl your toes in your shoes, and it will help you stand up more straight. And also, you won't walk around as much, and you'll kind of remember just to stay grounded. And people can have different styles with this too. Matt Zarnecki, my co-founder, every single pitch, Matt is here. Like Matt is just like, this is his stance, this is how he talks all the time. And that's not me, but I recognize that, and Matt is very effective when he is like that. And I'm much more of the walker and talker, and that's okay to do as well.
And then in regards to the walking, if you do have a stage and you can walk around, of course, you can turn to walk, but never like turn too much, feel like you're turning your back on the audience, and try not to run across the stage if you can help it. About the nervous tics. This is why it's really important to pitch in front of a mirror, in front of other people, or one of the best things is in front of a camera. Because a lot of people do things subconsciously. I was an MC for one of my high school's big auditorium shows, and I didn't even realize this until the tech director kind of shouted, "Teeger, what are you doing?" And I realized on the stool, my leg was wrapped around one of the legs. I don't know why, but it's stuff like that that really shows people that you're nervous, that you're not confident in what you're doing. So making sure that you're aware of what your body's doing and adjusting it if you feel like it needs improvement is a really important thing. Smiling, that seems kind of obvious, but you want to make sure that people know that you're happy to be up here, that you're happy to have the opportunity, and that you are, again, excited about your product.
Point on the smiling when you talk, it does make you sound better, and practice it in front of the mirror, like actually like smile and then talk. Basically, before every single pitch, Matt and I would do the exact same thing every single time. We'd eat a vert bar, we had this high five thing, and we'd get super amped, and we'd walk in there and be like very energetic, and both of us would smile at each other. I told Matt every single time we walked on stage, the last thing I would tell him is smile when you talk, every single time. And that's because people would come out of our pitch. This happened like many times. People would be like, "Oh my gosh, it looks like you just had one of your energy bars," like as a joke. But it was great because we could laugh it off. People were like so impressed with our energy, and that was how we ended up winning more pitch competitions. Because a lot of people walk up there and say, "Oh, and here's my idea. Like I've been working hard on this idea." Versus you walk in there and say, "I'm thrilled to tell you about my idea." Like that's actually the way that you should go into it. And smiling when you talk is a great way to help it out. On the stop shanking and calling your nerves part, one tip for that is pinching these two fingers right here and holding them. It's really helpful if you have a mic, for instance, to have a pressure point right here. I shake really bad, and sometimes my hands will just be like shaking horrendously if I'm talking, but then I'll just hold right here and then talk like that, and then we'll settle the shaking as well.
I think we actually skipped the point here about projecting your voice and pacing yourself, and this is another important reason why it's important to film yourself pitching, because you really want to know how much time you have, and that you can get all that information in there in that time without speaking like this and really feeling like you're kind of rushing all of them things, because people really don't understand that you really muddly, as I just did.
And then last point on the slide, and then we'll finally move on. But Stanley McChrystal, who's a professor here and was a general, would say this a lot of commanding the room that you walk into, and that really projects leadership, projects confidence. In your head, walk into the room like you've already won, like you will command it and you will dominate it, and like you were gonna come in. I'm serious. Like you need to walk in with some confidence, and that's not to be arrogant. That's not to be cocky at all. That's to think of, you're on my team. I'm gonna lead you. Here we go. That's what you should think of with your audience all the time, and trying to engage them.
And that helps in everything: voice, posture, and your overall presentation.
And on the Amy Cuddy point, sorry, she, the TED Talk that I did send out was kind of like with a purpose. She does talk a lot about your posture, and if you want tips on improving your posture and your confidence and like how you act in those type of areas, Amy Cuddy's talk is really helpful.
If you find yourself shaking, which like it happens to me, like it happens to everyone sometimes, the very first thing you should do if you have a podium is put down your paper. Because it's actually not that obvious if you're shaking, unless you're like shaking a piece of paper, in which case everyone notices. So like put down the paper. It's fine if you have to like look down or something, because then people won't notice you're shaking. If it's really bad, just like hold on to the back of a podium. Like if nothing else works, just hold on to it and just look out at everyone and just read off your paper and give your pitch. It's gonna be fine. You're gonna get more comfortable, but like that's like something that worked for me for shaking.
Yeah. Also volume. That's an important thing. Don't say too loudly or too softly, but make sure everyone can hear you. Yes?
Wait, are you supposed to like read off paper or palm cards or memorize?
Up to you. I think it depends on your style. I really do think that it does. I'm a big believer in not reading off of things, but like I wouldn't have notes for when we would give pitches, but Matt always would, and that's totally fine. You can even have note cards. A lot of times what would happen is we'd write down direct note cards and then never look at them. And that's totally fine to do. If it helps you feel more confident, go for it. If you literally do want to spend the time reading it, it's better to read it and convey good content than to not read it and to be jumbling words and things like that. So really find what's comfortable for you. Content over like how that aspect looks. The last thing is, you're gonna mess up, and that's okay. Walk on the stage not expecting perfection, because if you expect perfection, particularly from you or your co-founder or anyone else on stage, and you see something that isn't perfect, it's gonna throw you off. So really expect the worst, sort of train for the worst, and be okay with that. If you stumble over words, if you get too nervous, say, I'm sorry, I need to collect myself, here we go. That's totally acceptable to do in a pitch. I've done it before, other people have done it before, and it's really better to do that than allow yourself to kind of panic and do worse. Because you'll be surprised. Sometimes you'll forget things that you would never forget in practice, but it'll be okay.
And mentioning that point, going to PowerPoints, one of the biggest things on here, we'll just skip to that, is never read from your slides. You can use them as a reference, but it's really bad if you're kind of looking up here, or even if you have a little screen down here, looking down here the whole time and just reading off of them. And that keys back to the first point, which is make your PowerPoint as simple as possible. Images are much better than text, pictures with 1,000 words, and it really is, because you are speaking and you want the attention to be on the words that you're saying instead of the words on the screen. So if you put a lot of text on there, people are going to spend that time reading what's on there instead of listening to what you're saying. And also just make sure you make your PowerPoint neat in the sense of, if you want to add colors, make sure you can, but make sure the contrast is really good. If you have important words on there, make sure they can read them, and make sure it all just looks neat. Margins are all aligned, nothing's too tilted or jumbled. And then a big part about PowerPoint presentations is make sure you review them before you go on stage. That you can kind of know what's next. You don't have to have it memorized per se, but you have to have an idea of your flow. Design your PowerPoint with that intent in mind. So you know where you want your presentation to go, and your PowerPoint's just there as a guide, but you're the one making it, and it's a tool completely for you. And last point is, just keep it short and concise. Nobody likes to listen to 2-hour monologue.